Thank you, and welcome to this webinar on Nordic Tax Aid. My name is Lisa Sivertsen, and I am the Director of Politics and Society in the Norwegian Church Aid, and I will be the moderator here today. On behalf of the organizers, I wish to welcome you all, both the eminent panelists and participants we have with us here today, and also the audience who is watching the live stream on YouTube. I hope you are all doing well during these challenging times. We have an excellent list of speakers here today who will all help us to shed light on the work ahead. How can Nordic Tax Aid really make an impact on the fight against poverty and inequality in a critical time where several crises are hitting at the same time? Are we living up to our commitments to the Addis Tax Initiative? And how can we work together to ensure more resources, but also more energy and more impact for the tax aid in the years to come, globally and also within the Nordic region? We also have some very interesting speakers from the civil society today who will share perspectives on what we have achieved so far. Why is tax aid still important, and how can we make it better in the years to come? Before the program starts, I need to share some practical information with you. Unfortunately, I will not tell you where the coffee and the emergency exits are, but some basic information for the new digital reality we are all living in at these times. The audience is highly encouraged to write questions in the comments on the live chat on YouTube. And we will be sharing these questions, or some of them, if there are too many, with the panelists in the discussion part of the program afterwards. And if we are not able to go through all the comments and questions, we will collect them and we will send them and share them with the panelists afterwards, because we want also the panelists to be informed about your comments and questions. Yes, and then some of the panelists must leave before the program is finished, and we will welcome at least one other participant, actually I think two other participants during the program as well. Unfortunately, we have some last-minute changes in the program. Ms. Geneba Bangura, the Deputy Commissioner General for the National Revenue Authority in Sierra Leone, unfortunately had to cancel at the very last minute. And Mr. Rasmus Nordqvist from the Danish Parliament is also not able to join us, unfortunately. And we also have a change in the program with the representative from Tax Justice Network Africa, where Ms. Chenai Mukumba is representing and stepping in for Alvin Mosioma, who unfortunately also had to cancel. These are difficult times for many of us, and I think we just need to adapt to that reality. So I think with that introduction, I really hope to see a lot of comments and input from the audience, so that we get a feeling of your input to the speakers. And with that, I will introduce the first speaker, one of my colleagues from a sister organization in Sweden, Diakonia, Ms. Penny Davies. She is the policy advisor and one of the long-standing champions of this work. She will give us a brief introduction to set the scene. She will help us taking stock on the Addis Tax Initiative commitments. What have we achieved so far, and also some initial thoughts on the way forward. So thank you, and please welcome Penny.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Can you hear me? And now I would like to ask my colleague, Sigurd, to share my PowerPoint presentation. There we go. I will, on behalf of the organizations, on behalf of the organizations behind this seminar, I will, as Lisa mentioned, present background to the Addis Tax Initiative and engagement of the Nordics, taking a stop where we are now and looking forward. Next slide, please. As we all know, increasing domestic resource mobilization through tax revenues is even more urgent and of course more challenging than ever. The pandemic has increased the gap between domestic revenues and financing needs even further. And also looking at some of the COVID-19 responses have in several countries resulted in regressive redistribution of income and resources. We all know, of course, that people living in poverty are the hardest hit, but also ordinary people, workers, are bearing the burden, while some wealthier elites and some corporations have increased their profits. But this regressive trend is long-term. Even before the pandemic, we had a regressive trend in the form of a decrease of corporate income taxes, at the same time coupled with an increase of value-added tax, which have had negative effects on people living in poverty and gender equality, and women in particular. We also have over the decades faced a large-scale drainage of domestic resource mobilization through the ongoing illicit financial flows and tax avoidance, which hasn't been solved sufficiently. And on top of that, many of our countries are now facing an acute debt crisis. So given this background, the ATI commitments are even more urgent and pertinent than before. Next, please. Just to ensure that we're all on the same page, as many of us know, the Addis Tax Initiative was launched at the third International Conference on Financing for Development in Addis in 2015 as a means to finance the SDGs. Since the launch, it's grown and now consists of 45 countries, 25 so-called donor countries, 20 development partners, and a number of supporting organizations. And the Nordic countries, they were part of this from the start. And in the following slides, I will present some findings of the results on how the Nordics and donors are doing in terms of the commitments. You can see the ATI commitments in the box on the slides. Just very quickly to mention them, that the first one is for donors to double support for domestic resource mobilization by 2020. The second one is to do with partner countries to step up their efforts for domestic resource mobilization to reach the SDGs. And the third one is for all to promote policy coherence for development. So next slide, please. And looking at the first commitment of doubling DRM support by 2020, according to the latest ATI monitoring report, which was published in November with data from 2018, donors have increased official development assistance in support of DRM as a number of, reaching a number of $372 million. But still $69 million is missing. And to reach this target will require substantial political will, not least as the pandemic is placing new demands on development cooperation. Now, looking at the Nordics, as you can see in the table, according to the latest available data from the DAC, Norway is the only country that already reached the target of doubling aid for DRM by 2020. Sweden has increased its aid, but has not yet reached the target, while Denmark and Finland are lagging behind. And the table shows how far each country must go in terms of sums by 2020. And just to mention that the data for 2020 is not available yet. That will be available at the beginning of next year. So moving ahead to next slide. As we all know, DRM is not just about collecting more taxes. It's about collecting better. And how revenues are raised, and of course how they are used, are key. In general, progressive taxes are seen as having potential to address inequality, while regressive taxes have a negative impact on people living in poverty, and women in particular. And looking at ATI donors collectively, not just the Nordics, they have to date placed very limited emphasis on the importance of promoting the development of more equitable tax policies and practices, according to research by Oxfam and others. And also looking at gender issues, DRM programs still only weakly address issues relating to gender equality, and more work needs to be done to mainstream gender. And of course, there are many aspects of what is a qualitative support. But looking at the Nordic, one thing stands out. There's been a trend, a big shift in the last few years of DRM support being provided bilaterally to being channeled through multilateral institutions, including the World Bank and the IMF. This raises questions and potentially concern whether this support is actually reducing inequality and promoting gender equality, as these institutions are known to have supported progressive tax policies in the past, and also in recent COVID-19 policy advice on tax to countries. At least this is something that needs to look into in terms of quality. Next slide, please. In terms of the third commitment in the HI, Policy Coherence for Development, PCD, this is difficult to monitor as there are no universally accepted indicators for this target, and efforts are self-reported. PCD is a commitment for all HI members, but of course donors are key here, as they have the responsibility to ensure that their tax systems do not impact negatively on developing countries' ability to raise revenues, and also to ensure that developing countries are able to participate in international decision-making on tax on an equal footing. And looking at the evidence here, we know that many Nordics have several double taxation agreements with developing countries that can potentially be harmful for their tax base. And as of yet, none of the Nordics have carried out a full-fledged spillover analysis of the tax policies to ensure that there is no negative impact on DRM in developing countries. Another aspect that's important for PCD is support to so-called accountability actors, watchdogs, civil society, parliament, etc., that play an instrumental role for transparent dialogues on tax policy choices and for combating tax dodging in countries. And looking here at the Nordics, the share of aid for accountability actors has actually gone up as much as 30% in 2017, but since then it's gone down to around 20% last year in terms of total aid for tax. Next slide, please. Now, looking ahead, as many of us know, a new HCI declaration was adopted last month with 4 new commitments to be reached by 2025. The quantitative target is still there for donors to maintain or surpass this, but also more focus is now on the quality of the support. And 3 things in particular stand out that I would like to highlight. First, there's a stronger focus on equitable tax policies with a clear gender focus in the declaration. Progressive tax policies are spelled out as a priority to achieve this. Second, there's a stronger focus on donor countries' responsibilities now to assess the effects of their policies and actually conduct so-called spillover analyses of their own tax policies. And there's also a new commitment in terms of accountability actors. There's now a commitment to give support to accountability actors, media, civil society, parliament, and to engage them in tax and revenue matters in partner countries and to involve them in a meaningful way. This includes both giving them space as well as providing capacity building support. So moving ahead, in terms of the new declaration, we, organizations behind this webinar today, we see the new declaration as an opportunity for the Nordics, given their own experiences as welfare states, to pick up on this fight against inequality and to support tax systems that enhance gender equality. And we also see that this provides an opportunity for the Nordics to come together and have a stronger voice in international institutions and share good practices around tax and development, because we do believe we have lessons to share. And we have today, ahead of the webinar, produced a report with, I think, 10 recommendations targeting the Nordic governments. Just to quickly mention 4 of them here to give input to the discussions. Of course, first, we recommend the Nordics urgently to fulfill the quantitative targets of doubling aid for DRM for those who haven't done so, but also to ensure that Nordic aid actually contributes to reducing inequalities by promoting progressive tax reforms that are gender sensitive. And this should include the support that are more and more being channeled through the multilateral organizations. And the Nordic countries should review the tax policies of the multilaterals to have a look at those. And third, to fulfill the commitments of PCD, including by conducting so-called spillover analyses of double tax agreements and other relevant tax policies. And finally, to increase the support for accountability stakeholders, civil society, media and parliament. And here we do believe that the Nordics have a very special role to play, given our history. And this is, of course, particularly important at a time of shrinking civic space in many countries around the world. So I'll finish here with those recommendations and hand over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Penny. Thank you for sharing, for giving us a very good introduction to the topic and the issues. And also for sharing with us the new promises and highlighting that this is really also an opportunity that we are really hoping to hear from the politicians we have with us today, also how we will continue to work to meet these promises in the years to come. So thank you very much, Penny. I will then give the word to Ms. Chenai Mukumba, who is the Research and Advocacy Manager of Tax Justice Network in the African region. And Chenai, you will share with us some perspectives from your side on why this agenda is important in the years to come. I think also you will shed some light on the links to the SDG agenda and hopefully give us some challenges as well to reflect on in the discussion. So thank you, Chenai.
Thanks so much for that introduction. Yeah, so I think with regards to the discussion around domestic resource mobilization, at TJNA, I think this is really some of the work that we're very passionate about. I think particularly if you take into consideration the space the COVID-19 pandemic has put us in, right? Where with many countries, you're seeing a decreased amount of tax revenue, but you're seeing an increased need, right? And so what are the kind of methods that do need to be put in place within countries to promote domestic resource mobilization, particularly against the decreasing overseas development assistance that we're starting to see, because they are also increasingly having pressing needs of their own. And so, you know, some of the kind of reforms that we are, you know, trying to push for example, are in many countries we don't have wealth taxes, right? And I think particularly now where we've seen an actual increasing in inequality, this is something that we think we should be pressing on in terms of how we can promote domestic resource mobilization. But I think I also want to speak a little bit to, you know, the Addis Tax Initiative. From there, I think one of the things that we saw being put forward was this UN Global Tax Body. And this is something that we have also very strongly advocated for. And the reason being, you know, we would want to see a space that is much more inclusive, where you have representatives from the global south sitting, you know, par on par with colleagues from the global north, rather than having an OECD / you know, G20 process, and then having certain mechanisms almost thrust upon, you know, sort of global south countries, and then we see difficulty in implementing. And so for us, the idea of a global tax body is something that I think is quite key. In addition to this, I think one of the things as well that we think is so important, particularly as we're trying to have this conversation, is, well, of course, and most absolutely, there is a need for capacity building, right? There is a need for enhancing technical capacity within the African continent. What's also equally important is the political will and political support side of the conversation. And this is one of the issues that was in fact raised in the HLP report that was led by His Excellency Thabo Mbeki. And in order to deal with this particular issue, a lot of the work that we've been doing as Tax Justice Network is almost twofold. The first is trying to raise the awareness of the general citizenry in terms of what tax means, right? I think for many countries, prior to moving to TJNA, I was working at a national level. And when you would talk to the general citizenry about the budget, they had absolutely no cognizance about the fact that, the budget itself came from money from their pocket, right? And so as a result, a road would be built and they saw it as a favor, right? Rather than this is actually something.
Sorry, Chenai, sorry to interrupt you. I think I'm hearing a little bit, I'm having a little bit of a trouble hearing you all the time. So I don't know if you others are having difficulties with the sound, or but if you could just speak a little bit more slowly, maybe, and then maybe you have the same problem as me. I've been told to keep my hair on this side, not to interfere with the microphone.
No problem.
Maybe you can try to do the same. But thank you so much. We've heard most of what you said. It's just that the sound is disappearing in between. But we've heard most of what you said. Thank you.
Okay.
Please
If it continues, let me know. I'm happy to turn off the camera as well, because I think that should probably help. So I think one of the things that we think is really, really important is, okay, I can see I've unplugged the power network perhaps. All right, I'll see if I can do that. Working to ensure that we have an informed citizenry, right? Because this is essentially what we see as quite important when it comes to promoting a social contract, right? And crucial to having leaders be held accountable, right? And so this is kind of some of the work that we're trying to do to see that we can also speak to the political will side of this conversation. Other work that we're doing within TJNA is to work with members of parliament, right? Because we also see them as very, very crucial, particularly for the legislative side of conversations. Often, they're in these positions and they've, arrived within these spaces, but may not necessarily be equipped and positioned to ask the right kind of questions. And so in order to help them, play their oversight role well, this is something that we also think is quite key. And so as a result, I think, we've seen a lot of support, particularly within this conversation, going towards tax revenue authorities, particularly towards technical capacity building and all of that. But we also want to see, I think, an increased support also going to other state actors that I think are able to then create almost a demand, right, for what we want to see in terms of increased progressivity, particularly within our tax regimes. And also the reason we see it as necessary to be equipping civil society, equipping the citizenry, is because alternatively what's happening is the private sector tend to be the one who have access, right, to many of these institutions, and as a result are then contributing to many of these regressive tax regimes that we're seeing, because they have the clout to enter into certain spaces and have audience with executives, and make the case for reduced corporate income tax, right, and rather increase VAT, which I think is quite clearly regressive, particularly within that regard. So I've definitely seen the note of what I have 1 minute left, but I think by and large, when within the context of the Nordic conversation, I think we have seen the Nordics play quite I would say helpful role in trying to help us push for many of the reforms that we think are necessary across the African continent. And I think what I would want to conclude with is, would it be possible, I think, to see much more of a leadership role, right, in that direction, so that we can increasingly start to see other partners value the contribution of other stakeholders that I think are quite crucial when you're having these conversations about increased domestic resource mobilization, particularly within the African continent. So I think I'm happy.
Thank you, Chenai. Thank you so much. I really hope that you could get most of Chenai's message. I heard a lot of very interesting points and definitely some interesting challenges as well. She highlighted the need for a more inclusive space and capacity building, but also political will and support. And I also heard Chenai talk about this need to create a demand for progressive policies and how we can support that from different perspectives. And she also asked for more leadership on this agenda. So thank you so much, Chenai. It was very interesting to hear from your perspective with all your experience working across the African region. We now have the next part of the program where we will invite the Nordic government's responses to the civil society voices you've heard here, but also the commitments, the new commitments that we have made. So the first person I will give the word to is the Norwegian Minister of International Development, Mr. Dag Inge Ulstein. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and also Penny and Chenai for setting the scene for us. Again, this is a very important meeting, and thank you for facilitating this. We are hit by a pandemic that is putting us to the test these days, and it has exposed and amplified deep vulnerabilities in almost every society. And it had made so many lives so very difficult to live. I think we all know the numbers, and we know many of the kind of difficult stories that we got to almost every day coming in, and we see it in the media also. But again, we know now that more than 800 million people were still trapped in extreme poverty before the pandemic. And as we enter this decisive and this decade with an aim to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030, as many as 420 more million people may now be pushed into extreme poverty. So this is not just a health crisis. It is an economic crisis. It is a nutrition crisis. It is a protection crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. And again, faced with an enemy, the virus that knows no borders, our fight against it must also cross borders too. It must cross barriers to thinking new. So again, I think it's really important that we could sit down and discuss this today also. And some actually say, and seems that like luxury to talk about tax right now. But I believe that it is a necessity. It is so important that we do just that. So as we commit to building back better, we talk a lot about that also. We also commit to building tax systems better. If we do not have strong, sensible, fair and predictable tax systems, nationally and internationally, we will fail in reaching our common goals in this. So we must emerge from this crisis with a deep sense of purpose to build better global financial and fiscal systems. Also, I think only then we really can expand welfare to encompass every person and protect our planet and create sustainable future also. As you all know, tax system is never an aim in itself. It's an instrument. It can be used to mend, build, create, innovate, and empower, but it can also be misused to shift resources unfairly, ruin businesses, stifle innovation, and empower autocrats. So I really think that we must work closely with civil society when we design our engagement on tax and illicit financial flows. There is no legitimate and effective and efficient tax systems without a strong social contract. So again, I think that civil society voice is really critical in holding power to account, in ensuring that reforms benefits the people, and in pointing to deficiencies in fiscal governance also. And I think I can speak for all Nordics when I say that we need you to continue to challenge us and our development partners if we are to succeed in this. The new Addis Tax Initiative declaration forces us to focus on content in and outcome of tax reforms. For Norway, committing to the declaration does not mean committing to spending more money on domestic resource mobilization than what we do today, but it means spending more time to consider the implications and consequences of our engagement. And as I really encourage my Nordic colleagues to do like Norway and reach the ATI spending target, we need a broader discussion. Let me highlight a few of these issues we must start to tackle in the coming month. How do we better use our common proof of concept in showcasing a high tax, high welfare, business-friendly reality? That's one of the questions. The Nordic context may serve as inspiration for many, not for duplication, and that this is important, but for supporting the argument for stronger tax systems. How do the Nordic ensure that policy coherence on tax becomes a reality? How do we ensure that our domestic tax policy becomes one that supports global development goals? On capacity building, how do we build on each other's strengths is also important to discuss further. There is a lot of contact across the Nordics already, but are there other ways of working together to ensure even more efficient and effective engagements? How do we better jointly engage to change global rules on taxation and dirty money? The UN High-Level Panel on International Financial Accountability, Transparency and Integrity for Achieving the 2030 Agenda, or the FACTI panel, shows that many of the challenges developing countries faces in stopping illicit financial flows are found in the architecture of global tax systems. As the panel delivers its reports early 2021, it provides impetus for joint efforts from the Nordic countries. So one of the other things that we should discuss is how do we ensure that we use this opportunity to make lasting change? I really think there are many aspects and many questions that we should spend time on discussing together. But friends, let me end where I started. Discussing tax is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Just about every single lasting solution we have, from education, health, and social safety nets, are dependent on us succeeding in doing the tax thing better. Doing the tax thing better will sharpen all our most important poverty-reducing tools ahead of 2030. And it will help us reach our great goal of eradicating extreme poverty and the other sustainable development goals. So again, thank you all for sharing these goals, and thank you all for your attention. Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Dag Inge Ulstein. That was a very inspirational and also very encouraging introduction from you. Thank you very much. And I also, I hope everyone heard the different aspects of this discussion that you would like to highlight in the discussion. That was very encouraging. So now I want to give the word to Sweden, to Mr. Per Olsson Fridh, who's the State Secretary to Minister for International Development Coordination in Sweden. Varsågod.
Thank you, Lisa. Also, I'm very grateful, of course, for the opportunity to discuss this important topic with Nordic colleagues, parliamentarians, and representatives from partner countries and civil society organizations. I very much welcome this engagement. I think this is extremely relevant, and I want to thank Penny for a great introduction, for Chenai for excellent comments, and I must say that Dag Inge, I agree. It was a very inspirational statement. I do agree with what he just said. And yes, I mean, this conversation has somehow to start with the fact that we are all facing this extraordinary situation with the current pandemic. The short-term, the long-term consequences are dire, especially, of course, for the least developed countries and for vulnerable groups, parts of the world where the socioeconomic consequences precede the pandemic itself, and therefore also challenge us as partners to combat both the pandemic in its urgency, but also the long-term consequences at somehow the same time. And there is a financial, as a resource gap for us to be able to do so, and that is where this conversation, I think, fit very well in. The need for humanitarian assistance has more than doubled since early this year. Levels of extreme poverty, Inge just mentioned that, acute malnourishment have increased, and they are now at an alarming rate. And again, as usually, women and children are particularly hard hit, with great strains on health, on education, among, of course, other things. And financing for development, or financing for sustainable development, will be even more crucial than I think we understood before the pandemic. It has really put a spotlight on the need for us to engage more and to broaden this discussion. And domestic revenue mobilization is, of course, of key importance when we build back better and greener, and which we gather to talk about often these days. Now, tax systems serve, of course, to generate a much needed resource for development purposes and the attainment of the SDGs. Tax systems, of course, then need to function impartially and effectively or efficiently for that purpose. And we can come back to that. But tax systems and tax policy can contribute greatly, of course, to promote equity, gender equality, and not at least to build trust in government, between people and government, and thus then strengthen the social contract in societies. So also having a development cooperation that is targeting tax system, building capacity in tax systems, helping mobilize these revenues, is also about building more positive social contracts and therefore then resilience in societies. I think this is very well reflected in the new ATI declaration. How revenues are collected and taxes are spent are, of course, at heart of legitimate governance and democracy. But again, we must not support the capacity building of tax systems that then lead to the financing of autocrats, or even more shrunk space for democracy's actors and voice bearers. So we all now also, since democracy is also on a backlash, this is a balance that we need to discuss and find ways through. The Swedish government, my government, hosted a tax conference, the Stockholm Tax Conference in 2018. We seek to build on the results from that conference to promote tax issues at the global, regional, and bilateral levels. We highly value the work of our national tax agency in supporting tax administration in low and middle income countries as part of our development strategies. And we also direct, of course, our DFI, Swed Fund, to be a positive contributor in mobilizing domestic tax revenues in the partner countries that they operate in. One question for today's discussion is how Nordic aid on tax can contribute to reduce inequalities and enhance gender equality. And because we have to remember that the 3-4 decades of being successful in lifting people out of extreme poverty was also 3-4 decades of increased inequalities inside and between countries in the world. So yes, this is something we need to work with. And in line with our commitments in the declarations, we welcome a more broad-based systematic approach on tax, on development in this new declaration. Includes, of course, new commitment on space and capacity for accountability stakeholders. And that was mentioned earlier also, which is crucial, of course, from this democratic point of view that I raised also before. Being a feminist, representing a feminist government, having a feminist foreign policy, all our Swedish development cooperation is based on a gender perspective. Tax policy, both in terms of revenue and expenditure, has a direct bearing of the lives and the situation, the rights of women, their economic empowerment and living condition. And we are keen on engaging with partner countries and monitoring progress also from this point of view, of course. Now, Lisa, again, thank you very much for this initiative, for welcoming us to this, and for your engagement in this issue. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for another very encouraging and motivating introduction. I've heard you mention the social contract, and I think, as you have mentioned, several of you, I think in the aftermath of this pandemic, we will see increased inequality, and I think we really need to step up to rebuild the social contract in so many countries and settings. I also heard you highlighting gender, which I'm very happy to hear, and it's still very encouraging to hear that the Swedish government is a feminist government. It's very inspirational as well. So thank you so much. I will then give the word to the next speaker. It's Ms. Elina Kalkku, who is the Undersecretary of State of Development Policy in Finland. So you're welcome, Elina.
Thank you, Lisa. Can you hear me? Very good.
We can hear you well, but we cannot see you.
We're not allowed to
because you have limited access to
put the Zoom on our machine, but now it will work out. Lisa,
we can see you now.
Alla kära vänner, god eftermiddag. What a pleasure to discuss tax aid issues among Nordic friends and colleagues today. And let me begin by thanking the Nordic CIOs for organizing this event. A very important webinar indeed, and as much as we need an active civil society in Africa to promote tax transparency and justice there, I think we also welcome your role in monitoring the Nordic government's performance against the Addis Tax Initiative commitments, and your advocacy is constantly a welcome inspiration, a reminder, and also encouragement to our work. Let me look briefly back at history, because I think the Nordic countries will provide also an example of the way we think about the societies. And we all have, we share a long history of building a welfare society, which is founded on shared values and a very strong social contract between the government and the citizens, as you rightly pointed out in previous interventions. And here individuals and companies can trust that the government not only taxes them, but also delivers value for the services, for the revenues collected. And I think this is an important element when we discuss with our partners in Africa and elsewhere. This is the way our society work, and this is the way our societies have become welfare societies, very competitive, equal societies at the same time. I looked at the figures shown here in the beginning, and I have some positive news for you also. In Finland, the government program gives us a really strong political mandate to participate in tax justice work in Africa and Europe, and also globally. And we definitely do not tolerate aggressive tax planning. We support solutions for combating and hindering the operation of tax havens, both within the EU and globally, and so on. And we have a new taxation for development action program. It is guiding our tax-related development cooperation for 20 to 23. And the focus is very much on strengthening Africa's domestic taxation capacities, and also Africa's voice in global tax policy processes. And this program also commits us to ensure that our companies that benefit from the government ODA respect their tax and transparency obligations. So this is an important element of the package. The Addis Tax Initiative has been referred to many times already, and it is also for us the backbone for the work. And we still have a way to go to reach the quantitative ATI goal of doubling aid to domestic resource mobilization. But we are now catching up, and the good news is that we will reach it by actually that level by 2022. So that is in the making. And we're very pleased also with the qualitative objectives that have been added to the new Addis Tax commitments for 21-25. The new declaration draws attention, as you so well know, to progressive taxation as an effective way to reduce inequalities and also to promote SDGs. And you know, our finance minister has been very active in promoting finance ministers' cooperation on climate issues, and this group has grown, and it's also a new way of looking at government budgeting and taxing from a very sustainable perspective. And we really appreciate the leadership that Norway in particular has played in the Addis Tax Initiative and also the UN FACTI panel on transparency and reduction of illicit financial flows and corruption. We're happy that Norway has joined us in funding the African Tax Administration Forum, Tax Justice Network Africa, which is also supported by Sweden, and the tax-related work of the United Nations University Wider and the UNDP, such as Tax Inspectors Without Borders, which is also a key actor here. We're very much looking forward to cooperating with the other Nordics in extending UNDP tax justice work to the whole global network of UNDP country offices, especially in Africa, but globally, of course, and moving the tax for development agenda also closer to national SDG agendas. That is hugely important work. I think all partners that work on tax justice in Africa, they're increasingly focusing on reduction of the IFFs, and we definitely appreciate the work of ID that it has done to create a global standard for promoting greater tax transparency in mining, gas, and oil industries. Very important. We sponsor AD Secretariat, and we are a member of the board, and that is really a valuable actor and valuable way of looking at development at the same time. And we also support a Push What You Pay, the key global CSO network that monitors transparency in the extractive industry is a very important area indeed. The reduction of IFFs is one of the top agendas also on the agenda between the African Union and the EU, and at the EU this is very much happening under the leadership of the Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen. We're planning to join the EU Team Europe in building the capacities of the African Union Commission and other Pan-African networks in curbing IFFs and strengthening African capacities for domestic resource mobilization. This is high on the EU agenda, and that is also very good news, I think. And this is definitely also follow up to the work of the high-level African Union IFF panel that you know so well. Finland and Norway have recently discussed the idea of promoting the digitalization of African tax administrations. And through the use of blockchain technologies and artificial intelligence, I think the risks of tax evasion and avoidance can be reduced substantially. And we find this would be an interesting area of cooperation for all the Nordic countries, a very topical issue indeed. And I think we have to remember the cross-border nature of tax evasion and profit shifting, and that's why it is critically important to engage also with regional African partners and partners in other continents. And we know several Nordic governments are already supporting African Tax Administration Forum and also other Pan-African members of the EU consortium on illicit financial flows. This is very important. Thank you so much for organizing this event, and thank you for watching what the governments are doing. That's an important role for the civil society, both back home and also with our development partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Elina Kalkku. Thank you for giving another very inspirational introduction, and thank you for sharing some very encouraging news from your side, and a very exciting initiative with a new program, both on how to increase taxation, but also how to increase I think you said the African voices in the global tax processes. I think that's a very interesting initiative. Also, I think it was very interesting to hear you highlight the need for regional cooperation. So definitely between EU and AU, but maybe we could also look more into how the Nordics could engage as a group with other regional, could be the EU, but it could also be the AU or other African regional organizations as well. So thank you so much. I will then give the word to Ms. Pernille Mortensen, who is the Deputy Director of the Department of Multilateral Cooperation in Denmark. Vær så god, Pernille.
Tak skal du have. God eftermiddag til alle. Thank you very much for inviting Denmark for this incredibly important conference. I think, as has been highlighted from everyone so far, this is indeed an important issue, and we really commend the NGOs to get everyone together and discuss this issue. So thank you very much for that. And particularly, you know, around this critical time as developing countries are reeling from the impacts of COVID-19, and where we see that tax revenue is shrinking while demands for public expenditure is increasing or is going up. So from a Danish perspective, you know, critical to minimize the setbacks to those long-term effects so that we can achieve fiscal sustainability. And, you know, we've reviewed and looked at the new Addis Tax Initiative agreement and really find this as a suitable frame for pursuing this in our development cooperation. And Denmark has also developed and maintained a broad engagement in revenue mobilization in 2015, or since 2015, which includes a range of support and cooperation on tax reform and advocacy in Ghana, in Kenya, and Mozambique, Myanmar, and a range of other countries, particularly in Africa and Asia, and also strengthening tax administration measures through multilateral organizations. We've also worked or engaged with internationally to curb tax avoidance, which obviously is also a very important issue, as has also been mentioned by other speakers, tax avoidance and evasion, including in the extractive industry, which Finland was also mentioning, and also supporting regional exchange of experience between tax administration and Pan-African NGO work for tax and transparency. So, I mean, we've maintained a multi-pronged and multi-layered involvement and been engaged in this area for a number of years. And continue to see this as very important. And just want to also mention in terms of gender equality, which has also been raised as an important issue, and equality more broadly, that throughout its entire development cooperation, Denmark is placing a huge emphasis on gender equality and transparent and accountable governance, which is a fundamental pillar of everything that we do. You also, I think, in the introduction, you know, in terms of transparency and advocacy and really kind of supporting those civil society organizations as well to maintain the critical dialogue about how do we do this in the best possible manner and how do we address those fundamental issues. So very welcome. Denmark is currently reviewing its development strategy for the coming years, where obviously, you know, fighting poverty and equality will remain an enormous priority, and this is why we also really find this conference particularly timely to kind of feed into that process of reflecting on what should our development cooperation look like as we move ahead, and gives us an opportunity to explore how we can fine-tune our programs and also how we can look at opportunities for Nordic collaboration. And I, you know, just really want to take this opportunity to just to just kind of note down all of these very good examples that I think we would be very happy to explore with our Nordic partners, and also how we can use our voice even stronger in international forums to kind of take this issue forward. So just really wanting to say that we look forward to being in close touch with our Nordic colleagues and friends, and also with our partners in development cooperation, both here in the Nordic countries and also in the developing countries, to look at how we can address these issues further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pernille Mortensen. Thank you so much. And also let me just say thank you on behalf of the civil society. I think it's also very encouraging for us to hear how all of you actually are valuing the civil society and the role of the civil society, which is also part of the new declaration. And I think now, I will start with some questions for you first of all, and I will also open up the floor for Chenai. And I know that I think, unfortunately, I think both Elina and Inge will have to leave in a while, and then we have others who will step in on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway and Finland. So that's also so we have speakers from all 4 countries throughout the whole discussion. I think I will wait a little bit with the external questions. Sigrid, I will start with one very open and general question from us. You're all you have very ambitious policies, I think, on this, and that's extremely important and motivating to hear. And I think it's very fair to say that the Nordics do have a special role when it comes to tax aid globally. I think we are seen to be very much of a leading region of the world, leading both by example and history, but also I think in terms of global engagement. If I can ask you now, in light of the pandemic and the massive increase that we are seeing now in terms of poverty, inequality, what do you think will be your sort of most important urgent initiative or priority in the aftermath of this pandemic, which we hope will slow down quite soon when it comes to tax aid at a global level? It's a very open question, but I just want to try to ask you to prioritize, because you have so many extremely important plans and ambitions, and that's very useful. But if you would have to prioritize one, what would that be? Can I ask maybe Per Olsson Fridh to go first? Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, I'm honored to go first. I mean, I think one big priority now is to make sure that this economic recovery that is needed creates not only a recovered economy, but a more equal and inclusive economies. So to build back better must mean building more inclusive economies that can enhance equality and combat inequalities in countries. So I think that is one of our biggest priorities at this point, and that of course has a lot to do also with policies and reforms regarding tax, combating illicit financial flows, capacity building, and so on. If you're looking for an answer which is more technical, what is the more detailed thing that you want to prioritize first? I cannot answer that because there's no societal change that comes with just one priority or with just one reform. We have to see that these things come together. So as we build back better, to also make sure that we have a more green economic recovery, we must see that environmental sustainability is so interconnected with the social sustainability, and that therefore to bring gender equality on top of that build back better agenda. So what I think on top of my list sometimes is to learn what was it that made the success the last decades. I mentioned this earlier, the last decades of lifting people out of extreme poverty, but that was creating more inequalities at the same time. What is the lesson learned from that, so that we now can, when we again lift people out of extreme poverty, but not in a way that creates growing inequalities, but at least that divides that, or that bridges that gap, so that we can have economic recovery with growing equalities instead. And I think, I don't know actually what is that. I don't have that answer, but I think some of the answers lies in exactly what we're talking about now. So when we go into tax issues in our development cooperation, let's do that with the notion that this is that this must lead to more equality, and not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
One way to answer your question, at least.
Thank you. Mr. Daginge Ulstein, what would be your one priority if you were forced to choose?
That's a really, really difficult question to a politician. But we need difficult questions. It's, first, I think that we are in the midst of a hurricane and everything is really upside down. So actually to use that momentum is perhaps the first and the main important thing, because everything is about the pandemic and everything is about everything else. So to make sure that we do put this in the center of the discussion is really important, because there are so large investments going into the different sectors, and there are so many threats that this will be a discussion that will be put aside. So that is my main answer. But if I should try to be concrete, I will actually say that to take further the FACTI panel's recommendations. So that's one very concrete thing that all of us can do. And the other thing is to make sure that we find mechanisms that assure that a policy is coherent on tax. And that was two, can I say three things? And the last thing is to accelerate our bilateral programs in this also. So, but it's difficult to be very concrete. What is the most important thing? But we should use the momentum and this crisis. It's a crisis and it's devastating, but there's momentum that we could use actually much better.
Thank you so much. I think it's difficult for us in the civil society as well to choose one thing, so my sympathy. But I think you both answer with very, very important and targeted initiatives, I think, that we surely need to highlight. Pernille, can I ask you as well to jump in here? Thank you.
Sure, and yes, I agree, a very difficult question. Perhaps to be a little bit more broad, I very much agree with what has been mentioned. I think also the importance of cohesion of society and transparency and trust, I think, is incredibly important as we build back better from this crisis, and that we use that as an opportunity to really strengthen that critical societal debate, strengthening that societal cohesion to kind of take us to a better place and a more sustainable place as we build back better and move hopefully out of ahead of from this crisis. And then more sort of concretely, recovery is very important, and on the sort of shorter term or shorter medium term, achieving fiscal sustainability will require more revenue and growth that allows everyone to engage profitably in the economy. So really looking at jobs, looking at opportunities locally for engaging in the economy and enhancing household income and then the ability to pay tax so that governments have the ability to lift those critical services to its populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Pernille. And I notice now that Ms. Elina Kalkku from Finland, unfortunately, she had to leave, but I know that we do have with us the program director for taxation for development from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, Mr. Timo Voipio, is here with us as well to join the discussion. Would you like to share some high priorities from the Finnish side? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lisa, and thanks for organizing this. This is indeed very inspirational. I'm a great fan of Nordic cooperation, and I wish that we do more of it in the future. Trying to make a difference, I think I would say that we should probably do more, still more, to create space and provide resources for the African champions of this agenda to do what they need to do. I don't think we should keep sending money to Washington and to Paris pretending that we are helping Africa. There are really capable, really dedicated champions in Africa, like ATAF or Tax Justice Network Africa. There's a great chance to promote more of that through this European Union, African Union, IFF partnership that we are kind of trying to, we are in the process of becoming partner in that. And I think I would advise maybe the Swedes and Danes to consider that as well. And I think we always want to keep Norway in the same team, Europe. I also believe that through some of the cooperation that Norway and Finland have been doing with UNDP, we can maybe find ways to link the taxation agenda much more strongly onto the mainstream SDG agenda in every country. Thanks. We couldn't hear you, Lisa.
Sorry, my mute button was disappeared for a second. Sorry, so thank you, Timo. I think I also would like to introduce to you another person now, who, because I noticed also Inge had to leave, but we do have with us Arvin Gadgil from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's the Policy Director of International Development Policy. Hi, Arvin. It's good that you could join us as well. I also want to introduce a person we have invited to the session, to this discussion, to ask some questions as well. It's Mr. Magnus Ek, who is from the Swedish Parliament. Magnus, are you here? Yes, you're with us. Thank you. I'm with you. Thank you. Would you like to share your question with us, please? Thank you.
I would like that very much. And first of all, let me see you. Thank you for inviting me as well. And I heartily agree with Undersecretary Kalkku that it is a pleasure to discuss these issues among Nordic friends and colleagues. I truly believe that we together are an even greater force for good than we are individually as nations. I have a question. I think we've heard some very wise and insightful things from each of the different countries, but I would like to follow up with a question. A big challenge for us is not just helping to create tax systems that are fair on paper. A really big challenge is making sure that there are institutions and there are powers working so that powerful people or corporations or other authorities in the developing countries can't find loopholes in this tax system, can't avoid tax. So my question is, if anyone can develop on how do you think we can strengthen Nordic developmental aid and Nordic policy towards creating and building rule of law and independent, and for example, independent national auditing authorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Magnus. It's a very relevant question, and I think all the panelists so far have touched on this issue. I think if we can do a round of answers, actually, because I would really like to hear from all of the panelists on this issue on Nordic cooperation. Maybe, Pernille, could I ask you to go first maybe on this, because you have this very interesting setup now where the Minister of Development is also the Minister of Nordic Coordination. Yes, please.
Sure, and thank you. I was quite afraid you were going to put me first, because I'm not entirely sure I'm able to answer the question, but certainly on Nordic cooperation, we've just had a new Minister for Development Cooperation for about a week and a half. So I don't know. I won't say too much yet about sort of his concrete priorities, but certainly he's very engaged in finding ways of how we can strengthen the Nordic cooperation in development aid, or in our development cooperation, and certainly with regards to some of these issues that we're talking about today, where we really have already a strong cooperation, but where we also probably have a stronger position or an ability to really sort of have a stronger voice together on some of these issues that are very Nordic or very European, and where we may be able to really lift the agenda. I think that's very, very important. And then I might leave it to my colleagues here to sort of provide some input on the more technical details, but we can certainly discuss that further after the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Pernille. So I think at this point you can also raise your hand if you want to take the word, but I would invite Per Olsson Fridh to answer the question on Nordic cooperation next, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and good to see you, Magnus, and good question, I think, that you put in this. I mean, for sure, I think the experience of the national agencies and institutions in the Nordic countries of working, of serving the people, of serving the public is an experience that we very much would, that we want to transfer also to as a capacity to the building of such institutions in partner countries, of course. And I think, I personally think that one of the best programmed aid that we can do is the twinning of capacity building of our national institutions with national institutions in partner countries, combined with other types of support that serves as a catalyst to improve these things from different angles. And I think there's probably quite a lot of space to continue to learn how to do that the best way in between the Nordic countries. I think there's space for learning how we best involve our national tax agencies, for example, or related agencies in our development cooperation. And probably we could also do better mapping of what countries and partners do we cover as a Nordic in these things. How can we help each other in that sense, so that we don't overlap, but that we contribute to each other's policies. But again, and this is something that Magnus, that you and I discuss now and then, is that unfortunately a lot, we see a lot of governments or regimes in Africa and elsewhere that is now taking the pandemic also as an excuse to shrink the democratic space even further, to put disproportional restrictions on its people and so on. And in that environment, I'm not so sure that I want my public agencies involved building capacity in public agencies in countries that doesn't serve its people, that doesn't serve its public, but serves its regimes instead. So this is a challenge, but maybe also here there's space for increased, learning and exchanges between our Nordic countries on how do we act in such environments, how do we actually write policies that is efficient in that environment, because in the end, in these countries, populations are increasingly vulnerable, increasingly poor, and are in the need of institutions with the capacity to serve them. So how do we do that the best way? I think this is an area where we need to learn and work better together. Maybe, Magnus, it's one way to answer it, I think, but I think you're spot on on something that we need to do more about.
Thank you. I think I see a lot of hands now, digital hands. So, and that's very good. But I think I think also some of you, as Arvin says, not able to raise my hand. You can actually use your hand. Okay, I can see it. So I can also just do that. And I know Chenai, Timo, and Arvin. And I think this question, Magnus, I think about Nordic cooperation has engaged everyone. So there's a long list now of speakers. I think first I will let Chenai take the word, and then Timo and Arvin as well, and then I will open up to some of the questions from the chat. Okay. Thank you. Magnus, did you have any comments so far to the two speakers who responded to your question?
No, I don't think I have any comments. I'm very grateful that you addressed both sides of it, both how can we cooperate more between the Nordic countries, but also the main question, how do we, and as you said, Pat, this isn't an easy question, but something that takes up a lot of my time, as I'm sure it takes up a lot of yours, on how can we build functional institutions that protect the citizens. We know from our own Nordic history that democracy doesn't come first and then comes rule of law. It's a parallel evolution, and they have to go hand in hand.
Thank you, Magnus. Chenai, you're the next on the speaking list. You're welcome.
Great, thanks so much, Lisa. So I think I just have a couple of thoughts, and sort of having followed the current conversations. I think the first is that we definitely have seen and recognized and acknowledged the support that the Nordic countries have been giving, I think, to this effort. And I think, like I mentioned in my earlier remarks, that this is something that we really hope continues and to some extent also motivates other countries to do the same. I wanted to also, I think, speak to, there was a point mentioned earlier around, we've gone through this pandemic, how can we build back better, right? Because even though, we were disrupted and there's a lot of things that weren't going right, I think there's a lot to be said about how the way in which our economic system was working was not the best, right? And so now, as we think through the next steps, right, as we think through what kind of structures we want to put in place, I think that's a really, really important question. I think that's worth thinking through, because it's so important that, as we move forward, a lot of the issues that have become highlighted throughout COVID inform, our next steps. I also just wanted to speak, I think very quickly to, some of the, at least within the African continent, some of the measures that have been put in place to combat COVID-19. Of course, we weren't hit as much from a health perspective, but economically, I think we saw a lot of livelihoods, completely devastated. And what we saw was many of our sort of revenue authorities putting in place support mechanisms for corporates, right? And not so much for the individuals, right? We don't have very strong social security measures, right? And so that was something I think as civil society, we sort of spoke against quite significantly, because at the end of the day, it's almost as though you're choosing to save a corporate over an individual lives. And and I think even as we start to move forward, these are some of the reforms that we continue to advocate against, right? That we should be prioritizing the individual rather than the corporates, right? Rather than reducing corporate income tax, but looking to see how much we can set aside, to support individuals. And then another thing that I wanted to mention is that because of COVID, I almost feel as though, and this is something that internally as TGNA we've been thinking through. Because of COVID, we've seen such an exacerbation of inequality and poverty, right? We haven't done as well, I think, as a continent in implementing wealth taxes, for example, and I think the more, and this sort of goes back to the work that we do as TGNA, the more we're able to inform the public about, the current state of being, the more we're able then to create the demand to hold our leaders accountable, right? The more we're able then to enforce the social contract. So we haven't been able, for example, to do these property taxes, these wealth taxes. But when you communicate to the public, right, to say, we're going through this really difficult time, there are these options, right? Now is probably one of the key moments that we can actually garner public support, to start pushing through some of these reforms, tax reforms that we've struggled over the year, just because I think I mentioned earlier state capture and the role of private sector and all of that. And I think for me, that's something I wanted to sort of think through as well, and and share as we kind of I think think through like what a new almost economic system could look like that's much more fair, that's much more equitable, right? And one that can actually distribute a bit more. I hope you were able to hear me. I took out my earphones.
Oh yeah, we heard you very well, I think. So thank you so much, and I will just give the word now to Arvin, who raised his hand. Arvin, you're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you all for a really interesting session. I'll try to be brief. I see our time is short. And Magnus, thank you for a good question, which I actually perceive as several questions in one. One has to do with practical cooperation in the Nordic context. Another has to do with policy cooperation. You talked about building rule of law. And the third has to do with the dilemma between the rise of autocracy, which we are seeing these days, and our push to increase public coffers, which is basically what the tax agenda mostly, not all, but mostly is about. On the practical bit, I'd like to just point to the fact that we actually do have a pretty long, proud history of cooperating on several key state institutions for control and democratic control over public budgets in the Nordic, not necessarily among capitals in Nordic countries, but certainly in countries where we are present. So, for example, we've independently, but still shared experience on supporting different auditor generals, as you requested, which is already happening. Now, the question probably is, should we do more of that? And that, I think, as we and that's sort of to segue into the second part, which has to do with the dilemma bit of the question. Yes, but I'm not necessarily with you on the argument that there is a necessary link between our responsibility on supporting countries raising taxes and our responsibility in ensuring that that money is spent in the right way. And this is a bit of a break in the way that we've been thinking development policy before, because normally we've sort of had that overarching responsibility, the feel that we need to understand if we put money into a system, we have to understand where it exits the system, how it's spent. Now the Agenda 2030 is very crystal clear on this, and so is also the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. It's each and every country's responsibility to decide their spending. It's not up to us to dictate or hint or in any way other try to steer that spending. Now, that being said, the reason why we believe that these accountability actors, which now have, we really lobbied and negotiated really hard to have part of the Addis Tax Initiative 2.0 declaration, that they have this significant spot in our new commitment period, has to do with this fact that we believe that civil society are the actors that are best placed in asking those questions, keeping power to account, and truly calling out those governments who are not spending their revenues in a way that is protecting people's rights, and perhaps doing the opposite. So it is a dilemma. I'm not saying that it's not, but it is. We have to be careful in how we, to what extent we adopt responsibility. Now we have to consider whether we are doing any harm or not. And the principle of doing no harm is not actually a principle in development policy, but we should at least think about whether we're doing harm.
Arvin, I'm so sorry. I think I have to ask you to
Sure.
wrap up, please. We only have 4 minutes left.
Sorry, just let me end by saying that on the international arena, on creating new global norms, we have to cooperate as Nordic countries, and it's urgent. And we'll get back to that.
Thank you. Actually, we have quite a few questions from the audience, and we have only a few minutes left. So I will now, I still have a speaking list. I have registered that some of you have raised your hand, but I would like to throw out at least one question that I would like to challenge some of you to answer. It's from John Du Chipeta, and it's to all the Nordic representatives, but we don't have time for everyone to answer it. Nordic countries should lead by example, ensure their double tax agreements with developing countries are progressive. That's a statement or a question. Who would like to answer that? Can I see a hand? Per, Fridh, or Pernille, or Timo, or Arvin? One of you would like to answer on double tax agreements?
No hands.
No hands for that one. Pernille, would you like to say anything on that, or?
I mean, I think that for me, the issue is that this is also an issue where our Ministry of Taxation is very much involved, and since they're not here today, then I would prefer not to go into that issue. Not that it's not important. I mean, obviously, this is a key element in our toolbox to address these issues. So I recognize the importance of the question, but to really come into the details of it, I would need to have those on board that work with this on a daily basis.
Thank you. Any comments on that? Arvin, he's raising his hand. So okay, Arvin, 20 seconds.
I'm not really sure how to answer the question because I don't properly understand it. What I can say is that we spend quite a bit of resources helping the UN Tax Committee, and I also recommend the other Nordic countries doing the same, to develop the model UN tax treaty to include other things than simply tax efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So because we're running out of time, I would like to give 1 minute now to Timo, who asked to get the word a while ago. Timo, you're welcome.
Well, maybe, thank you. Maybe this kind of in response to the first question, still like, what could we say? What should we do as the Nordic group? The one-liner I think from me would be that we should link better our excellent Nordic gender equality agenda with the taxation agenda. I think we have been supporting the tax administrations. We haven't yet been supporting enough the tax policymakers in the governments, and especially we haven't yet made well clear enough the linkage between those tax revenues and those government institutions, ministries, and those professionals who depend on the tax-funded services. I think we have a direct and social protection, and we have a direct link then to the unpaid care work done by women and to the big number of women and men that we could employ in formal jobs in the care economy, and that requires tax revenues. So our tender work is fantastic, but I think we could think a bit more social science, sort of politically, about how we can really promote gender equality by doing kind of state institutional work like taxation for development.
Thank you so much, Timo, and thank you for raising the gender issue again. And Magnus, I know that you have to leave, and thank you so much for showing up here. And I think we actually all have to leave now. We're out of time. We have a lot of questions in the chat that we will forward to you. So I think it would be, I hope it will be interesting reading for you. Definitely it is interesting reading for us. And so thank you so much for everyone who joined in today. And I think we've had a very a big and a broad discussion, and I know we have to continue it. I hope there will be a Nordic cooperation increased between the governments on this issue. I hope we can have more between the regions as well, looking at you in particular, Chenai from the African region, to look at how we can also continue to build on those good relations between the Nordics and the African countries also on this issue. And definitely from the civil society, we will continue to hold you accountable and to be the watchdogs, that, but also the partners that we really aim to be in this important work. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.